Do you have any fucking idea, you know, what the Russian political system is like? Come on, like, do you really think we have a say? You know what I mean? And seeing this shit only, like, undermines our experience, the fucking shit I have to go through every single day, monitoring every fucking word I say on the internet, you know what I mean? You just don't know what it's like. Like, Americans don't really understand what kind of a privilege it is to live in a country where you can openly say Biden sucks. Right? In fact, a ton of Russians, even if they're not going out to protest because they might be terrified, they might have different reasons for it because it's fucking scary to do, okay? And you cannot even imagine what it's like. They are not causing this.
Okay, so I'm gonna look at this no fuckers thing now. We can watch like I'm not gonna be watching all the videos. You can't see it, but I have loads of tabs open because I've like got the direct timestamps open. So yeah, this guy is a Russian YouTuber. I haven't watched too much, but I've been aware of him for a long time. And I found these videos like pretty fascinating because it's not, he nearly has 1 million subs, so it's not too often you get like a YouTuber from a country that is very hated in the West who speaks quite freely, although he does say like he's trying not to speak totally his mind because he doesn't want to get in trouble and get arrested. But I found it very brave, the second video, but I want to play this first for you. He basically, this is before the invasion, and he was getting a load of messages basically saying they didn't want to subscribe to him anymore because he was Russian, and he had to do something and speak up. So
stop my Patreon and unsubscribe from your channel. You're a good guy, but also with a responsibility towards peace and brotherhood. I wish you all the best. I really enjoyed your videos. To single-handedly prevent the war from happening. Tell your people not to invade my country. Do not collaborate with your regime. We don't want to die. There will be coffins of young soldiers coming back to Russia. They would have died for what? Please use your voice for peace. What do these people want me to do? What can I do? Like, some of the DMs and comments I've been getting for the past weeks and months have been absolutely unhinged. And I just want to make this video to say, if it's not obvious enough yet, is that I do not want a war, okay? I personally have nothing against the people of Ukraine. As a Russian, I think that Ukrainians are our brothers, and I truly believe that. I have nothing against the country of Ukraine, and I do not want a war. War is not good. Period. And I don't really seem to understand why a lot of people think that me not talking about it means that I agree with it or something, or that I ignore it. I read this every single day.
So basically, throughout the rest of the video, he just talks about how like it's really like weighing on his mind. And this is before the invasion, remember that. And people giving him like loads of comments asking like, why is he not speaking up? Basically calling him like a shill for Russia and stuff like that. So that's just to frame the argument quick. So then this is when the invasion starts, and he talks about, so I've got two little clips, it's the same video. So he talks about like the mood of Russians that he knows. So obviously this is like very anecdotal, and I think I was reading some polling that before the invasion, I think it was like, and the polling, this is from a left-wing Russian who was on Owen Jones's show. He said like the polling obviously in Russia, it's not great because you have people who are scared to voice their own opinions, and you don't know how much it's manipulated. But basically, the polling showed before the invasion, I think it was like about 40% of Russians supported recognizing the separatist Eastern Ukrainian territories as independent from Ukraine. But I think it was only about like maybe 20% who supported invading Ukraine. So keep that in mind, because obviously he's a young person. You'd imagine that like young people who grow up on the internet will probably be more like anti-war, maybe be like more like globalized, and like he says, he sees Ukrainian people as his brothers. He doesn't think they're Russians' enemies and stuff like that. But yeah, like in his bubble, he says he doesn't know anyone who supports the war. But let's just get into this quick.
Russians, at least, well, I would say most of Russians do not want a war to happen. They do not want a war with Ukraine at all. I totally understand a lot of you guys are frustrated at Russia right now, but I just want to talk about why you shouldn't misplace that anger and place it on the regular everyday people. Yeah, I mean, what is there to say? All I can say is that the amount of things I can really say in this video is very limited because, well, I do not want to have any trouble with the law, should I say, right? I just want to talk about just what's going on in my fucking brain because I'm going insane. I want to talk about the feelings of the regular people in Russia regarding this, and just, I don't know, man. I need to speak because...
So yeah, obviously, like, I commend him a lot there. Like, can you imagine if you lived in a country where you see people like, is it Navalny, being put like through show trials, starved in prison and stuff like that, where opposition leaders and people, journalists are regularly like executed, killed in very mysterious circumstances. So just for him to use his platform to do this is like really, really admirable. And I think like directing anger at ordinary Russian people is both counterproductive and just silly as well. Because like I live in the UK, right? Supposed democracy. I can't do anything about my government. Like literally the way the system is designed, I cannot get Boris Johnson out of power. Protest will not get the Conservatives out of power. They've been in power since 2010. I can't do that. Would I be willing to try and overthrow the government or something? Like, no, I'm not going to risk my life. So the expectation that everyday Russians should go out and try and fight a deeply entrenched authoritarian regime and overthrow it because of the conflict, I think is deeply misplaced and is buying into standards that you would not accept yourself. Just because they live in a worse country than you, and also let's also remember, Putin was basically installed by the West after Yeltsin, right? Yeltsin personally chose Putin. Tony Blair was like very friendly with Putin in the early 2000s and stuff, right? So holding someone like him, like some of the messages before, accountable for the government of Russia is silly anyway. It's like, and it's even more silly than holding me accountable for the actions of the British government. Because yeah, I can vote against it. I can vote for a different party. Essentially, the way the system's designed, I'm not going to affect change. And what's the alternative, right? Do I try and overthrow the monarchy and the government? Like, do you expect that from me? Or can you use your voice to talk out about these things? Which someone like him is like really, really brave in doing. So yeah, like if you think all Russians somehow like love war, want war, I'd say look at the polling first, which proves even through like skewered polling that most Russians don't want war. And then listen to people who are actually like brave enough to speak out with like seriously, how many of you in the chat, let me know, how many of you in the chat, if you were this guy, would you talk about the war, would you call out the Russian government and talk about how Russians don't actually have a say in their political process? Would you guys do that? And if you're not going to do that, you're seriously going to be in the streets like battling the police and the military. No, you're not. So like, I mean, cut ordinary Russians some slack. This is on their government. And the same way, you wouldn't hold most Americans accountable for the actions of George Bush, despite the fact that most Americans supported him when he invaded Iraq, right? Americans are more complicit in the American invasion of Iraq than Russians are complicit in the invasion of Ukraine. And that's just the fact. More Americans supported the invasion, more Americans supported George Bush. Americans re-elected Bush after Iraq. You don't blame your ordinary Americans for that. And even if you try and blame them, you would still empathize with the fact that most Americans were brainwashed by their media to support the invasion of Iraq. You'd accept that, right? So put yourself in the Russian shoes and accept that if you say that you either forgive, understand, or don't think most Americans who voted for Bush even or supported the war are responsible for that in a democratic system, alleged democratic system, you cannot blame regular Russians for Putin invading Ukraine, okay? So again, you can say in the comments, if you'd even do this as a minimum, you're not going to be in the streets protesting, I think most of you. So just flicking through the clip a bit more, let's listen to him talk about why he's suddenly speaking up.
Do you know what it is? Not everybody is ready to voice this opinion, and I'm not trying to say right here, right now that I'm like a fucking hero for, making this video. I'm not. But I am anxious regarding talking about this, but I feel like one thing that kind of pushed me over the edge, Russians I see online, this includes people that I know in real life or online who've been posting stuff saying that they're against this. And also an overall thing is that what I noticed is that it's actually a lot of Russian YouTubers who are basically, my colleagues, they have been posting that they do not want a war with Ukraine. And I wanted to do it anyway, but so many people did it that it also gave me it lifted my spirits up in a sense. I felt like a lot of solidarity within the Russian YouTube community, I guess, should I say, that sort of pushed me to make this video. So yeah, as far as the overall mood of the Russian people goes, I mean, from what I'm seeing, the majority of the people are against it. They're just not being vocal. And this is the thing as well. Actually today in Moscow and St. Petersburg and other cities in Russia, there were pretty big anti-war protests protesting against this. And just the fact that there are protests in a country where going to a protest that's like unauthorized with the government could potentially land you in jail or get you a very big fine and, you know, create problems for your future career or whatever. The fact that people are still risking all that and doing it shows that there are people who are very passionately against it inside of Russia. Because this is one thing that pisses me off, is that like whenever you go on like Reddit, like r/.
All right, I just want to talk about the process quick. We'll go into this a bit more. So yeah, like you're thinking in democratic systems where you can peacefully protest. Think about, for example, how many people protested Iraq and Vietnam, right? And then think about how many more people would support those protests but not protest themselves, right? And that's in a country, especially with Iraq, where most of these protests, Iraq especially, I'm not talking about Vietnam because that's pretty brutal, but most of these protests went down peacefully for the most part, right? And you know that if you went to that protest, you're not getting arrested. You're not getting thrown in prison for 5 years. You can freely express your opinion on this stuff. And you know, back home, there are probably millions more people who feel just like you, right? So now think about this. Think about how much Russians must hate the war if you're seeing such large numbers protesting. Think about how many more people would support those protests but would be terrified of being thrown in prison, being persecuted for their politics, or potentially even killed at a protest, right? Think about that. You think people who protested the Vietnam War were brave for things like, I don't know, Kent State and the Democratic Convention and other like kind of like brutal protests, right? Then think about if you're pretty sure that if you go to these protests, there's a high chance if you get arrested, you're fucked basically. Your life is in danger. Your future is probably screwed, right? So think about how many more people would support this. And I think that's what people need to remember. You can say like, well, why don't more Russians do it? Well, think about your own situation. If you were in Russia right now, how many of you would even be at those protests? I'm sure a fair few of you would be, but how many of you would support the sentiment but have too much to lose? And maybe you have a family, maybe you have children to look after, maybe you have elderly relative, maybe you have disabled like siblings or something, or you just need to provide for your family, right? You can't afford to lose that by protesting a brutal authoritarian regime. And that's like what people need to remember. You can say like, well, Putin was elected, but we all know the elections are extremely dubious. Or you can say like, well, this percentage of Russians supported X, Y, and Z. You can say that, but even people, like I said, I think it was like 40% might have supported like separatist movements. Even those people don't want the war necessarily, right? And even maybe people who, in theory, maybe wanted the war out of some stupid jingoism. Like, how many Americans act tough and be like, oh, we should just like nuke the Middle East or some shit like that, or we should invade Iran right now. Think about how many of those people would actually still go along with it once they saw the carnage, like firsthand on mobile phones and everything. So again, like, I understand people might be like, well, the Bolshevik Revolution and the protests in 1905 against the Tsar and stuff. I know you can say that, right? But in this world where it's so easy to be tracked, monitored, and essentially like deleted from society in a way that it never was possible before. Again, like I just don't think people were giving Russian people enough credit for actually protesting, because they feel like because Putin is the worst thing ever, like they should overthrow the government. But think about like in Saudi Arabia, people get protested just get executed, like straight up. They crucify like teenagers for protesting or like other weird shit, right? And no one says, well, if the Saudi regime's so bad, why don't Saudis overthrow them? No one says that. But it's a worse regime, right? It's more brutal. You're more likely to be killed for protesting the government. Cut Russians some slack, but also respect how brave it is for someone to just stand up. Like, even if you think he's not saying enough, you can understand that at least even saying this stuff, like I'm sure he'll get a visit from the Russian government in the next couple of days. So let's watch a bit more.
News, and I'm not trying to diss everybody on that subreddit, but a lot of the people on that, whenever there's any new like thread about Russia, the amount of like fucking just hate on regular Russian people I see there is fucking insane. I see comments all the time saying that like all Russians are warmongering, xenophobic, you know. For me personally, I would say that in my entire circle of the people that I consider my friends, there's not a single person that supports this. I understand I have my own like social circle and it's all like kind of an echo chamber or whatever, but nobody likes and fucking wants war, okay? This war is not waged by the everyday regular people, and I see a lot of takes online of people also saying that Russians are responsible for choosing the presidents and the governments that did it. Do you have any fucking idea, you know, what the Russian political system is like? Come on, like, do you really think we have a say? You know what I mean? And seeing this shit only like undermines our experience, the fucking shit I have to go through every single day, monitoring every fucking word I say on the internet. You know what I mean? You just don't know what it's like. Like, Americans don't really understand what kind of a privilege it is to live in a country where you can openly say Biden sucks. Right? In fact, a ton of Russians, even if they're not going out to protest because they might be terrified, they might have different reasons for it because it's fucking scary to do, okay? And you cannot even imagine what it's like. They are not causing this. I mean, I really have no idea what's gonna happen next, to be honest. Of course, the obvious thing I can say is that.
So yeah, like, he's obviously like totally right, and even him just saying Russians don't actually have a say in their government is probably something that can get him in trouble. Of course, he doesn't call out like Vladimir Putin by name and stuff and say like this is what he's doing to our country, but he's basically saying like, yeah, you guys know, you know, we don't have much of a say, you know, this is like a totally rigged electoral system, and Putin is essentially, and yes, I say Putin like computer, I said this in the last video, it's just the way some British people say it, okay? Putin, that sounds weird to me. It's like saying Nike. I would never say Nike, right? I say Nike because people in England say Nike. It's weird. I don't know why we do it, but I'm not gonna change it. But yeah, like he's basically saying like, you know, we don't have much freedom here. You can't just go out on the street and say like fuck Putin and stuff. And I can't say this on a video because I'm gonna get in trouble with the government. So even him just like raising awareness of his stuff and trying to at least show people that not all Russians like love dictatorship, love you know, love Putin, love his regime or anything like that. Especially, and even if you're the type of person who thinks that, yeah, those Russians, they love war, they love conquering, they want to conquer Ukraine. Even if you think that, do you think your average Russian wants to do that? If you're just going to purely look at it from a selfish reason, do you think they want to do that while it destroys the Russian economy and destroys their money and raises the prices of everything, necessities that they need? Do you think most Russians want that? Even if you necessarily think they're all, like he was saying in world news, all calling them like xenophobic, warmongers and stuff like that. Even if you think that, then come on. So this is like an interesting point as well. He talks about the actual effects of the sanctions on him personally. And I, you know, you might say, well, this is not the time. Like and he actually, I might not play it because I might not have, it's a 10-minute video. I don't want to play the whole thing. I might not have it. But he says in the video that he knows people in Ukraine have it worse than him, right? And he's not trying to say that he has it worse than the Ukrainians. His house isn't being bombed. His family aren't being killed. He recognizes that. Before we like get comments saying this guy's just selfish, think of people in Ukraine, he does recognize that. But he's saying like, the only thing I can do is share my perspective as a Russian. So let's watch a bit of this as well.
The Russian economy is in shambles right now, and look, it's really hard because I feel like for the majority of the time, like before when sanctions were imposed on Russia, the majority of them were imposed to like harm the elites. Right now the sanctions are very much there to, you know, cripple the Russian economy as a whole and also to make the average Russian suffer, should I say. And I guess the overall thought process of the Western countries is that like if people in Russia really get it hard, then they might actually, you know, rebel or whatever, but I don't really think that's gonna happen, honestly. And also, because the sanctions that are imposed right now in Russia, I mean, these pretty much harm the average person. And honestly, I'm not gonna try to give you guys like a complete list of what happens. I'm gonna, I guess, pinpoint the main ones, kind of describe what that does to me and the average Russian. But yeah, guys, I mean, at this point, it's really hard to keep up with this. You know, when like every single hour I open the news and I see that some new sanction has been imposed, some new company.
So just a little comment on what he said. Of course, like, I'm gonna get back into this. Ordinary people rising up, he thinks that won't happen. It rarely happens. If he's saying it's probably not going to happen, he probably knows the mood of Russia a lot more in a country that you don't always get the full story. I'm sure a lot of Russians are not going to stand up to the government and stuff over this.
Company stopped working in Russia, some new service decided to shut down its operations in Russia, and at this point, like, yeah, I get it, nobody fucking likes us. Anyway, the sanctions are as harsh as they could have been, I guess. I mean, Russia got cut off from SWIFT, which is already an issue for me. Basically, long story short, if we're talking about me right now, like, I'm not able to get paid at all right now. From YouTube and from Patreon, guys, I cannot get paid. I've gotten a lot of Patreon donations from you guys, you know.
Alright, I've just muted while the ad plays. Yeah, so like the sanctions have been like really brutal in terms of like the currency stuff, and just like he's gonna get into it. I hope I've got that clip saved. Talking about how they're forcing Russians to convert their dollars into rubles. So wait, let's watch.
But I think it's gonna be a while before I'm able to withdraw those funds, you know? I have like a registered business account in Russia, I pay taxes and everything, and both of the banks that I had my business accounts in are sanctions and are cut off from SWIFT. I cannot make money on either of them right now. It's either, you know, I try to make a new bank account, but also the problem is that even if I make a new bank account, like a bank account in a bank that has not been sanctioned yet, nobody can guarantee that those banks wouldn't be cut off from SWIFT either. So yeah, right now, guys, I mean, I'm not like starving or anything. I have savings which are burning down every second because, well, it seems like having dollars in Russia right now is not even safe anymore because, you know, I thought I'm like a smart guy because I had a lot.
So you're going to talk about the dollar thing, but yeah, like you see, like it's probably not like the best example because he has like 1 million subs on YouTube. He has a Patreon. His videos do pretty well, right? I assume he's making a fair bit more money than me. And he said he has his money in dollars and everything, but I think it's just a good indicator how it's like, how is this guy responsible for what Russia's doing? Like, how is cutting his ability off to access his money that he earns on YouTube, like, good? Like, and this guy is probably a lot more well off than most people. Think of your average Russian. Like, think of the person who works hardest in your life, like who maybe has multiple jobs but still can't make enough to get by. Then think of them being in Russia. Think of them being in Russia under brutal sanctions, and then having that access to their money if they get paid in other currency, like, cut off. Do you think, like, obviously the goal is to try and make these people rise up, but like he says, he doesn't think most people are going to rise up. And who are you actually punishing? I'm going to get back to the sanctions in a bit because of who they're not punishing, because there's plenty of oligarchs like Roman Abramovich, the owner of Chelsea, who's selling Chelsea, who are not being punished. He's friends with Putin. He funds Israeli settlements. He's worthy of punishment. A guy like this, and millions of Russians who are far less well off than this guy, do not deserve this. And we'll get into how sanctions are just like basically kill people a bit later. So yeah, basically he just shows himself going to a Russian bank right now. So I think this is like really, really valuable as a perspective, just to show what the reality of these sanctions are on people who live in a country where they don't have much say on what their government does. And then apply this to countries like Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, North Korea, places that are far less well off than Russia, and think about how that affects them.
Only ATM of the greatest bank in Russia, Tinkoff. Actually a pretty good bank, to be honest, but not in the state of the economy currently. If you go online right now and look at the ATM map of that particular bank, and I got some money in it, it's like the only ATM in the entire city that's available. And it said that it had dollars, euros, and some rubles, like 300,000, which is gonna be worth like $2 by tomorrow anyway. But yeah, this is it. There was like a huge line in the back. We got told that there's nothing. In the beginning of the video I recorded, that was actually me going in the morning to the ATM, the only ATM in the entire city of St. Petersburg that was on the map, like ready for dollar withdrawal, right? So I went there and there was like a line from like, there were like 50 people in the line, and before anybody even got to withdraw the funds, people were basically just told that there is no cash available at all. So yeah, things are looking pretty grim. You know, you can't really withdraw dollars from any bank right now. Even withdrawing rubles is pretty hard as well. And I don't know, at this point it really feels like a lot of the USD that I have is gonna just fucking disappear, and and it's not like...
All right, so obviously, like I said, it's very valuable to get the insight of just showing people like queuing up for the ATM. Like, again, I try and make people empathize. I'm sure like there's a couple hundred of you watching now. Some of you might have grown up in a war zone. Some of you might have grown up in a sanctioned country. But for those of you who haven't, I haven't, imagine this. Imagine this for your parents when you're a kid. Imagine this for you right now as an adult. You literally cannot get money out. Everything around you, the price, not just spiraling out of control like it is in Western economies right now, it's spiraling out of control every single day. Your currency, which all your savings is in, completely deflating so it's worth nothing while prices spiral. Because your authoritarian government, you have no say over basically, has invaded another country. And another thing is, yeah, a lot of them will blame Putin and stuff, but then a lot of them will also have the thought process of, why are you punishing me? Why aren't you punishing them? Like, if you really hate Putin and all these people so much, punish them more. like more sanctions on the oligarchs. Why are you punishing the average Russian? And again, this is not going to make people love Western countries. And here's another thing. They're just going to hate both of them. They're going to hate the Western countries for doing this. They're going to hate Putin for invading, because they're going to see it as it is, in my opinion, and targeting of your average Russians. I've seen people banning Russian books, banning Russian films, banning Russian like football teams, which I get a bit more because football teams are like a political representation, especially the national team. Just banning Russian Paralympians, right? Not even letting them compete under like a neutral flag and stuff. And it's totally overkill, in my opinion, because the people waging this war are the government, the elites, and the military generals, who should all be targeted, not people like this guy, and not people who seems like he would agree with all of you about the war. I don't think this person is someone who you're going to have an argument about the legitimacy of the war for, and it's just like, it's just sad, because as we're going to get into at the end of the video, I'm going to finish it with that. What did the sanctions do to Iraq after the first Gulf War? How many children died? How many adults died? How many suffered even more unnecessarily? And I'm going to skip forward because I want him to talk about the dollar thing. So there's been an executive order so the Russian banks can get more money for everyone who has dollars to convert it into rubles.
And another very interesting one that directly affects me is that according to this like new executive order that's been signed, every single person that is making money from abroad, basically in foreign currencies, so that's basically again somebody like me who's getting paid from YouTube or Patreon or Twitch streamers or IT specialists, you know, who work in foreign companies, whatever. First of all, these people, including me, have to, in 3 days after the signing of this order, which was on March 1st or February 28th, they must convert 80% of all of the foreign currency earnings that they've had since the beginning of 2022 to rubles. You get it? So if you were making money from the start of the year in like dollars or whatever, you cannot keep that money in dollars. You have to exchange in your bank 80% of that income from the start of the year to rubles. And second, every single new payment that you're going to be receiving now in dollars as a YouTuber, IT specialist, whatever, if you're getting money from abroad in a foreign currency like dollars, now when you receive those dollars, within 3 days of receiving the funds, you also have to sell 80% of those funds. I mean, not sell, but exchange 80% of that income to rubles. I'm speechless. I am speechless. Now, I clearly understand why this was done. Basically, actually, one of the hottest sanctions, one of the harshest sanctions that was announced on the Central Bank of Russia, which is like the main bank of Russia that actually regulates the use of currency and funds in Russia. And also what they do usually is that the Bank of Russia, it has, well, they had a pretty big like reserve of foreign currency, like dollars and euros and Chinese yuan. So basically, they would use that currency in order to essentially just sell them and to buy rubles to sort of keep the rates up. Because right now, obviously, with the panic in the economy and everything, a lot of people are changing their rubles to dollars, but the supply of dollars is so low that in most banks, like when you go to buy dollar on the app, it says that you can buy a $1 for like 150 rubles. It's over. It's fucking over.
So obviously he's showing there that even the policies by the West to sanction the government and the banks, what they're essentially doing is just stealing dollars off the population to offset their currency, right? So even maybe the sanctions you're arguing like attack the the oligarchies, right? They're literally stealing dollars off the population and making them buy rubles instead. So they have more foreign currency in their bank, and they also get more people to buy into the Russian currency, right? So how does this help Russian people? How do these attacks help Russian people, right? I'm sure there are more, and the problem is Russian oligarchs still own loads of real estate in London and New York and loads of cities across the West. Why don't you seize all of that? Why don't the Western governments seize all that property? Why don't they seize all Russian assets in the West, oligarchs' assets? Why are they doing this to regular Russian people? Again, it's like this insane attempt, which they've tried again and again, to make Russian people rise up against Putin and his government and overthrow it. They didn't do it to people in more desperate situations. Didn't do this. They didn't do it to Saddam Hussein. They've never done it to Kim Jong-un. They haven't done it to the Ayatollah in Iran. They haven't done it to like more brutal governments in worse economic situations So you should see that it clearly doesn't actually work as a matter of policy. And if you want to actually hurt them, take their wealth. Like I saw that they seized that Usmanov's yacht today. That's what you should be doing. Seize the $800 million yacht. Don't steal it. Don't make it so the government can steal this guy's money and destroy his savings. And again, this guy is one of the more well-off people, I'd imagine, in Russia, based on his YouTube career. Imagine just your average person working like, you know, a hard like manual labor job or just working paycheck to paycheck, and then you slap them with this. What choices do they have? And that's what you mean. And you think their choice would be to overthrow the government, make them desperate enough. People are not going to do that. Case study, I'm going to show you right now. Here's one for you where they didn't do it. Iraq, 1990s, after the first Gulf War. Let's get into this quick. A look at the facts. Deaths, destruction, and suffering under the sanctions on the Iraq regime. The sanctions against Iraq were a total financial and trade embargo imposed by the UN Security Council, which was adopted on August 6th, 1990s, 4 days after Iraq had invaded Kuwait. So similarities here between Kuwait and Iraq and Ukraine and Russia. The rigorous economic sanctions were intensified through Resolution 687, which included provisions for the removal of WMDs. They remained in force until May 2003, with some parts still persisting today. While they officially stated the aim of the sanctions was to effect Iraq's withdrawal from Kuwait, payment of reparations, and eliminate suspected WMDs, the underlying purpose was to force a regime change, it always is, based on fraudulent claims and exaggeration. A few Western nations, particularly the US and the UK, fervently supported the sanctions against Iraq in order to achieve their agenda and topple Iraq's ruling authorities at the cost of countless of innocent lives. That the removal of Saddam Hussein would proceed at the cost of uncountable innocent civilians and the destruction of the entire society was of little interest. One of the greatest acts of aggression, the medieval siege of Iraq, as author and journalist John Pilger has referred to the sanctions, savagely catapulted the population of a formerly flourishing civilization into the abyss of human suffering, indignity, and death. It was the ordinary people of this havocked and mutilated country that had to bear the brunt of the sanctions. In his book, A Different Kind of War, Hans von Sponik poignantly illustrates the suffering of the Iraqi people under the policies of the sanction regime, steered from Washington and London and implemented by UN in New York, callous policies that were considered worth it by the then Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright. As the UN took complete control over the Iraqi economy, the country was deprived of its sovereignty over trade, with oil exports being under the tight control of Western nations and revenues being stacked in the French Banque Nationale de Paris. Iraqi-owned assets were frozen, with a 70% dependency on imported foodstuffs to cover the basic needs of the population. The Iraqi government was unable to provide the basic nutrition for its people, as the UK and US governments were rigorously blocking and delaying vast amounts of vital supplies for survival. More than $5 billion worth of supplies was blocked from entering Iraq in mid-2002 as a direct consequence of his policies. Iraq's infrastructure, sewage, water, electricity, and oil systems had been largely destroyed in the war. By 1995, the living conditions of the Iraqi population had degenerated to a point that experts around the world were warning of an imminent humanitarian catastrophe of historical proportion. The Oil for Food program by the UN Security Council, presented as a generous humanitarian response plan, yet fully funded by the Iraqi state, exacerbated the strangulation of the country and deepened the hardships of ordinary Iraqis. So the survey results published in August 1999 clearly show that children in the center and south of Iraq were dying at over twice the rate as a decade earlier, due to the ongoing humanitarian emergency brought about by the sanctions. 500,000 more child deaths occurred between 1991 and 1998 based on the findings. Concern expressed that the imposed economic sanctions have an extremely detrimental impact on children. 500,000 children. 500,000. That's what the sanctions did to Iraq. Did the population rise up? The only uprising that happened was straight after the war by Shia militias who were put down by Saddam. And the US, they enforced a no-fly zone on his jets, but let him use his helicopters, because that's great, isn't it? So Saddam puts down the uprising brutally, and then they put the sanctions on. 500,000 children die in 7 years. And that's what sanctions do. Like I said, in theory, you can say, oh, we'll sanction them, it'll get so bad, and they'll rise up and overthrow Saddam Hussein, or they'll rise up and overthrow Putin and his government. So the belief that people like NFKRZ and others will overthrow the Russian government, and these Russian generals won't command their troops to shoot the civilians, right? And then people will back down even more. And that's what authoritarian regimes do. It's not so simple. What these guys are good at is repression and oppression and dismantling revolutionary movements. And even on the off chance, like in Egypt, where a protest movement does overthrow someone, then there'll always be economic interest to bring the authoritarianism back. So for example, right, in Egypt, right, IMF policies, just like in Russia, cause an awful situation, this awful authoritarian dictatorship backed by the West, Mubarak's Egypt. He was forced to resign, overthrown, a new government gets in, the people elect the Muslim Brotherhood. Well, the West doesn't like the Muslim Brotherhood because they're Islamists, so they back Sisi, the general of the army, who overthrows the government and installs himself as a new president. And Egyptians are right back to square one. What happened? I thought you loved people overthrowing the government who were oppressive and brutal. Oh wait, you don't like it when they overthrow the governments you impose on them with your economic reforms as well, and you will do anything to overthrow their new government and put in someone who is basically Mubarak 2.0. And that's just like the very frustrating thing is, like, on a human level, these Russians have nothing to do with it, a lot of them, because it's an authoritarian regime. And I'm sure that a lot of people who say that Russians are complicit in what Putin is doing would not apply that logic to the people who elected Bush twice, even though they are way more complicit than someone like this is. Because if we're gonna say that the UK population and the US population were brainwashed by the media to support the Iraq War in a democracy, then apply that logic to Russia. These people don't have a choice. These people can barely choose their government. Yes, some people might like the invasion. 40% I saw supported the separatist movements in Ukraine. Doesn't mean they all support the invasion, doesn't mean they all support war. In his little circle, he's saying most people are against war. You see the big protests. Like, have you ever seen protests against Putin that big? Think of how many millions more Russians support that. And what do you do for them bravely standing up for themselves? You punish them. You destroy their economy. And like with Iraq, it's only going to cause more people to die. And that's why it's fucked up.